time we were behind the curve. And by just a few years later, we had already taken over 1,000 trips with nearly 500,000 passengers. And things were only going to get better. Holland America Line was about to join one of the largest movements of people in the history of the world. So for as long as America has been America, people have traveled from far away to make a new life in the United States. And before Holland America Line came around, it was expensive, it was difficult, and it was often extremely dangerous. In the early 1800s, long before our steamships, immigrants literally risked their lives to get across the Atlantic.
Immigration from, of course, the point of view from the Netherlands started in the 1830s. Sometimes they sailed as regular passengers with their own cabin, but most of them didn't have a lot of money because poverty was a reason to migrate, and they stayed in between decks. So they didn't have their own cabin, they just stayed in whatever bed was provided for them.
And conditions on those ships before Holland America Line were miserable. Yeah, the tween decks, or what you may know as steerage, where most of the immigrants traveled, were tiny. They were only 5 feet tall. There was no ventilation, and there was rampant typhus, dysentery, starvation, and the passage could almost take a month. Those sailing ships before we came around were often called coffin ships, for a very good reason. At times, one out of every 10 passengers died before reaching America. By the time our steamships came around, things had gotten better. The trip was shorter, but the conditions on the other liners were still pretty terrible. And yet here's the thing, nearly 11 million people immigrated to the United States in steerage. So we had to figure out how to get some of those passengers. And look, it wasn't going to be easy. The competition was ferocious, especially because the other companies were, well, let's say they were willing to play a little fast and loose with the truth.
It cost $10 to cross from Rotterdam to New York. $10 to an immigrant in the beginning of the 20th century was a lot of money. And they wanted the voyage that was safe and reliable. Immigrants were poor people, basically. They didn't go to travel agents, they didn't study brochures, but they'd go down to the railway station or the pub or the post office, and they would see these giant posters of liners going to America. So word spread that a ship with 2 smokestacks was safer than a ship with 1 smokestack. But a ship with 3 smokestacks was even safer. There's no correlation between smokestacks and safety, but they would look at the posters and count the smokestacks in the posters and pick that ship to spend their $10 on. Well, companies, thankfully Holland America didn't do it, used to add fake smokestacks to their ships so they would have more stacks on the top so the immigrants would go on their ship, so they called them dummy smokestacks. The second big story of that era, the immigrants had heard that if they ate raw onions for a month before they left Europe, they wouldn't get seasick. Total fallacy. There's no correlation between raw onions and seasickness.
Okay, first of all, we really appreciate that you didn't try the raw onion cure before you came on board. The science has offered us plenty of methods to treat seasickness that won't make you a social outcast on board the ship. Raw onions. But the point is this, Holland America Line had to figure out how to get some of those immigrants on board of our ship. And again, we weren't the fastest, we weren't the biggest, and we definitely weren't the cheapest. And we were not going to cheat by adding fake smokestacks to our ships. But despite all that competition, eventually 1 out of every 10 immigrants who traveled steerage to the US did so on board a Holland America Line ship. 1 out of every 10. And you know why? Because we treated those immigrants like human beings deserve to be treated. And that all started at home in Rotterdam.
So here we're actually at the Wilhelminakade, but at this side it's called Holland America Quay. And this is the main street, you could say, in Rotterdam. So basically where we're at, this square kilometer is the history of Holland America Line. Just on the opposite side you have the Royal Yacht Club, where actually the deed, when it was started, the company, was signed, dined and wined. If you walk a little bit up along the quay, you will find Hotel New York, which was the original head office of Holland America Line, and I have heard so many stories of people going there, trembling knees, and how happy they were when they finally got on board.
That building, which served both as our offices and terminal, is where it all started. And you can still see the name, our name, on the facade. Downstairs, immigrants came to purchase their tickets to get ready for their long journey. And actually, the baggage area now is a really nice restaurant with an amazing view and hele lekkere broodjes kroket. Upstairs were the offices, and today there are even a few rooms named after our founders. After the migrants purchased their tickets, they'd wait for a ship to arrive to take them to America. Sometimes they wait a few hours, but usually they had to wait for days and days.
When they stayed in Rotterdam, up till the 1890s, they mostly went, or I think all of them went to private boarding houses. And in the earlier days, the people of the boarding houses, well, they were not that fair in the prices people had to pay. And people like Pleet and Reuchlin, who were the founders of the Holland America Line, also saw this. So at the end of the 19th century, they built their own emigrant hotel.
Now, we built it just a few blocks away from our head office, and that was a huge part of the reason that we were so successful in those early days. And this was much more than just a hotel. We had a kosher kitchen, English lessons, classes on American civics, and doctors and nurses who checked for lice and disease. And when the immigrants finally got on board, they found something totally different from our competition. First, we did away with steerage class, renaming it immigrants class, where we serve 3 square meals in an actual mess hall rather than make the poor and the hungry eat in their rooms like other companies did. For example, let's have a look at the menu from the turn of the century. Monday, sauerkraut, smoked bacon, potatoes, plum duff. No idea what plum duff is, but I think with a little mayonnaise must be fine. First class passengers had it even better. Oysters on the half shell, seared duck. Have a look at the name of that ship, the Potsdam. We've repeated a lot of ship names in our history, but there's never been a second ship called Potsdam. It works in Dutch, but it didn't really sound right in English, I guess. Now, offering 3 square meals in a dining room might seem like a small thing, but it was actually a massive innovation, because it meant that 3 times a day, rain or shine, those passengers would leave their quarters and their rooms could be cleaned. So very quickly we got the nickname the Spotless Fleet. And this wasn't just about being tidy. Everything from the doctors at our hotel to the cleanliness on board of our ships was all about getting passengers to New York in a healthy condition. Because healthy passengers made it through Ellis Island.
Just south of where I am right now is Ellis Island, the great immigration station, where from 1892 to 1924, 18 million people passed through. Now, the immigrants were not allowed to come up to the piers of New York. The ship had to drop anchor south of here in the lower bay, and they would take them off in barges, tenders, or ferries, and all the third-class steerage passengers would go directly to Ellis Island, where beginning at about 9 in the morning, they would be processed by gruff customs and immigration people and doctors known as 30-second specialists as they hooked under eyelids and poked into ears looking for diseases. They were processed, and many of them were cleared by noon, would catch a ferry over to Manhattan or even here to Jersey City and start working in a factory the same afternoon in a pre-arranged job. They wanted to be Americans quickly. They wanted the idea that the streets were paved with gold. You could make your riches in America.